Hey, welcome to Creative Block. I'm your host, V. Gene is out doing some Q-Bomb stuff, so he'll be back shortly. And for today, it's all me. We interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam. We asked people on Twitter if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts. And today with us, we have Caitlin VanArsdale. Hey, did I say your last name right?
Yep,
No,
yep.
yeah.
VanArsdale, that's right. Yep, it sounds the way it's spelled.
Amazing. I'm always like, I should ask the guests beforehand how to pronounce and then I forget, and then I put myself in this predicament. But yeah, Caitlin, I met you at Sony, and you've had like a really amazing career, both working in TV, in feature, doing boards, now directing. And I kind of want to take it back to kind of the moment you decided to go into animation. Was it always animation that you were going for?
Not at all. Yeah, no, I started out, well, I wanted to be a biologist actually. And then I was going to go to school for that. But then my parents like really didn't want me to leave. I was living in Southern California. I grew up in my dad was in the military, so we moved around like every 2 years, but I went to high school in San Diego, and I was planning on going to college in Colorado. And my parents were like, no, stay here. Like, we want you to stay. And so I stayed in Southern California because they said they would help me financially with like living situation if I stayed. And, taking out student loans is intense, so I didn't want to. Yeah. So I decided to stay. I went to school I started out in graphic design, and then I switched over to advertising. Hated both. And then I sort of dropped out of school and just worked at SeaWorld for a couple of years.
That's where the biology came in.
Yeah. I worked at SeaWorld for a company called Commons Art Shops. And it was like caricatures and name paintings. You can get like your name painted with like animals and stuff in it. So I did that. And then through that, that's kind of how I met a lot of people that were in the industry at first, because there were a lot of people at that company who were like trying to get into animation, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was like a thing that people did.
That's so interesting. I didn't know that. But I mean, we had a guest previously, Carl Hedricka, for anyone who's been listening to podcasts for a while, who also did caricatures at a park for a while. I think that's something that we need to talk about more, y'all. Like, anyone listening, caricatures at a park, it's fine. You can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think doing caricatures is actually a pretty helpful tool to build your like drawing confidence, because you kind of have to like really draw on demand with pen, and you can't really, if you mess up, it's like you have to start all over again, you know what I mean? So if it's like, yeah, if you practice that enough, like your hand gets steadier, you know what I mean?
I
and
agree.
you develop like a drawing sensibility out of that.
Especially for boards. Yeah, that's really good for boards.
Yeah, and at the time, like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to draw very well at all. So I kind of was like, oh, I like to draw, but I'm not good at it, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have any training. And I thought, okay, maybe art is something I want to do with my life. And then I went to school. I decided to go to school, but I went to school for traditional illustration at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. And so I moved to San Francisco. I was there for about 4.5 years, pursuing that degree. And a bunch of really intense stuff happened in my life during that time. Like,
yeah,
traumatic things happened. I ended up studying abroad for a little bit, which was amazing. But I was really focused on traditional illustration. Like, I thought, okay, I'm going to do children's books or editorial illustration. When after all this like sort of traumatic whatever happened, I was working like 30-40 hours a week at the Apple store. And I was
really?
Yeah.
That's
and I was
so
trying
funny.
I was trying to do like school full time at the same time. It was awful.
Right. Oh, wow. Do you feel like it was like intense working? Like, because we've had a previous guest as well, Jim Mortensen, who had like a pretty long career at the Apple Store before going into animation. So do you feel like there's like any experiences that you had at the store that helped you in animation later on?
I definitely think, well, to some degree, yes. I mean, I got to know the programs really well. I eventually was made into like one of those creative specialists, you know, so I would like sit there. Basically what that means is I would sit at a computer and I would help like old people learn how to use software. Um, which was actually really lovely. Like, you know, people just
Oh,
coming in to learn from you and stuff. It was really
mhm.
nice. And I got to know the computers really well because of that, you know. So in some ways I do think it was helpful. I also think, you know, a lot of creative people were working at the store, and you know, people who
Yeah.
were kind of like tech savvy or who like were artists themselves, and so I liked it for that reason. You know,
Yeah.
but
That's cool.
it was just really hard to be doing that because it was like they required you to work a minimum of 4 days a week,
Right.
and you know, doing that at the same time as doing full-time art school was
Yeah,
not great.
how did you make it work? Was it that the classes were, could you move your, which was the schedule that you moved around to accommodate, or did you have to talk to both your school and at the store to kind of make both of the schedules kind of
um
work together?
I kind of I kind of just sacrificed my mental health. Like you know, you just kind of like you know, you can choose your schedule, and so you at school at least. So I would, you know, I would just kind of try
Yeah.
to have a schedule that like, you know, I would have enough time to like get to my shifts or whatever. And then, you know, at the Apple store they'd have like, generally speaking, like what your schedule is every week, like it was
Okay.
pretty regular. So
Hmm.
once I figured that out, it was fine. It was just a lot because I was, you know, I was taking public transit 45 minutes each way to get
Right. Yeah.
there.
Oof.
And you know, and then, you know, the Academy of Art University, the campus is like all over the city, so like you don't really have um it's not consistent, like you're traveling all over the city all the time. So it's just like it was awesome in terms of like just a life experience, but it was, you know, it was just really difficult to keep up with that and classes and homework and all of that stuff at the same time, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that was like when you were studying still illustration, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the time, I had a bunch of friends actually from SeaWorld and other places who ended up working in animation, and I had ended up with a bunch of friends who worked at Pixar. And so I was hanging out up there at the studio all the time, but it was still one of those things where like animation just felt very like unattainable to me. It felt like, oh, you need to be like really, really good to do something like that. And
Mhm.
I just didn't feel like I was good enough or that like I ever really would be good enough, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I kind of it kind of to me like it didn't even really cross my mind that it was like something that I would maybe be able to do. And so, you know, uh that idea didn't even like reach my brain until a little later in life. You know.
That's really cool though. I like that you mentioned that because we do get, and we do have a question from one of our patrons that is about like age and getting into animation. Actually, I'll just ask it now since it's kind of relevant to how you took a little detour before going into animation. From Joe Benson, one of our patrons, he asks, sometimes I worry I'll get to be too old to be in the animation industry. So I just wondered a couple of things. Do you have any older workers in your group? And is it a crutch? And like, and did you feel that way as well? Like when you were kind of thinking like, oh, I'm not good enough to get into animation. Is it too late? All of those kind of like in that realm of um
You mean like, do I think it's a crutch to say I'm too old? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I'm also saying kind of like, did you feel like you were too old to go into animation? Did you feel like you kind of missed a train? And
Um, I definitely there was a point in my life I did get to a certain age where I thought, okay, am I screwing up right now? You know, because you know, I was in school at that point. It was like, you know, I'd gone. This was the second time I'd gone to school. I still like, I ended up leaving that school as well because I
mhm,
couldn't afford it anymore. And I sort of felt like, you know, I wasn't old, but I was, at that point when I left San Francisco and left the school, I think I was 22. And I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I still didn't like feel very strongly about my skill level. I didn't feel like I um had an idea of like where my career was going, and I felt like people were getting jobs and stuff, and I was still like kind of lost. And so I definitely felt the pressure, but I think that once I decided on a path, I just kind of went with it. You know what I mean? I didn't really like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I ever had a plan, but I just knew that like, oh, if I just keep working at this, whatever this thing is, it eventually will
Yeah.
become something else.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 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 That's great.
so
I love that. Yeah. Not worrying too much about like, comparing yourself to others and just kind of like keep on trucking. Yeah.
right. And so yeah, I ended up leaving San Francisco, and then I went to uh Portland for a couple years, and I did freelance up there. Did like online, like really just stuff that no one should ever see. um and it was awful, to be honest. Like I liked Portland a lot. I moved up there with an ex who was working at Leica at the time. And so I ended up meeting people who were working there and just getting to know even more animation folks. Um and The thing I hated though the most was that I was just kind of working alone all the time, and I sort of realized that like in my personality type is just not really conducive to just like working alone.
I see.
Um
Yeah.
and so I was kind of depressed and kind of like not sure what I wanted to do. And I remember having a conversation with my ex and being like, hey, he had gone to CalArts and a bunch of my friends had gone to CalArts, and I was sort of starting to realize that like my art style was kind of leaning towards animation, and all the stuff I really liked was kind of like all the art I really liked was coming from people that worked in animation. Um and so I was starting to think like, what if I went into that? And it kind of started to feel like maybe that is something that I could do, even though it feels like kind of a pipe dream. Like all these people around me are doing it, so why can't I try it out? And so I thought, okay, what if I go to CalArts? And I was like, well, I can't afford it. I'm not going to get in.
Yeah.
And if I can't, and if I do get in, I'm not going to be able to afford it. So I was kind of, you know, I kind of like on a whim just like went on the website and for the school, and it was like 2 weeks until the due date for the portfolio. And so I for my sketchbook submission, I like took a bunch of drawings that I already had, just like because I'm horrible at doing sketchbooks. Like I'm it's impossible for me. And so I I pasted together a bunch of drawings from a bunch of different sketchbooks and like random stuff that I had drawn over like the last 2 years or something, and I just literally like glue sticked it into a sketchbook. Um and I sent that off, and then I got in, and then I was like, oh shit. I got in, and then uh I was like, well, I can't afford it, but then I ended up getting a scholarship. um
How did you get how was the scholarship application like? How did you
well, I don't know if it's like this anymore, but at the time when I went there, it was like every single character animation student got a scholarship of a certain amount, and then if you like could show that you had like more financial need, um they would give you more. So I did like this crazy spreadsheet of like I need more money, and like begged them, and then they gave
Oh
me more.
wow.
uh and so I was able to go for 2 years. And I knew that that was like, my parents at that point were like, look, like, you know we'll help you with like rent for like a student apartment or whatever there, but like that's it. Like you have to figure out all the other expenses, and then like after, like we can only do that for like so long basically. So I knew that like I knew that I wasn't going to be able to go there for more than 2 years. And so I you know, went there with the express sort of intent of like leaving as soon as possible. So I went
Right.
for 2 years. I was 24 when I started at CalArts. And then I went for 2 years, and then was lucky enough to get an internship at Cartoon Network on regular show.
Nice.
And then uh, through
How
that
was the
internship, sorry.
Yeah, how was the internship like, by the way? Like how was it like work being kind of like the day to day, or what were your duties, and kind of how did you make use of that internship?
It was cool. I mean, the thing about like that kind of internship is that like it's very much like a what you make of it kind of situation.
Hmm.
It wasn't like a creative internship. It was like a getting coffee for people kind of internship. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so what I kind of did was I sort of just tried to like go around to as many people as I could and like ask questions, um, and be like, because I still didn't know what I wanted to do. Like when I was in school, I sort of discovered I always thought I would go into like design or like biz dev or something, because I came from an illustration background, and so I was very used to doing like finished pieces, and
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was sort
Hmm.
of my wheelhouse. But when I was in school, I kind of fell in love with story, and I didn't really know, like, if I still think at that point I really didn't feel confident enough that I could do storyboards at all. um and so I kind of was asking around at this internship, like, to people, like, what do you like about your job? Because I also really like editing. Like I love editing, and I love like compositing and stuff. And so I was like talking to the editors and talking to the writers and the whoever at the studio, and kind of being like, you know what do you like about your job, and through that, the art director on the show ended up getting me hooked up with a test for Powerpuff Girls.
Cool.
And I sort of took the test with like the intention of like, okay, I'm just gonna like use this for my portfolio to
Right.
get better or whatever. um and then I got the job as the board artist.
Nice. Before the end of the 2 years.
Yeah, right after the second year of school. Yeah, after the first year, I went on a crazy road trip. That's a story for another day. I went on like I drove all the way from Los Angeles to New York City and back over the course of like 3 months. It was wild. But yeah, I was like, it was my summer between after my second year, and then I got the job, quit school, and then I became a board artist, and
That's
um,
awesome.
yeah.
That's really awesome. I love that. How was it doing boards for the first time, like in a production setting?
It was terrifying, honestly. Yeah. Um,
Was
no,
it
it
board or script driven? I forgot.
it was board driven.
Mm.
Um, it was good. It was a really good learning experience. I obviously now I like thinking back, there's things I would do differently, but at the time, I think, it was definitely like it was a combination of like incredible learning experience, some growing pains,
Mhm.
and some also like hard realizations about like what the job entails,
Right.
because
Yeah.
boarding is not a joke.
Boarding is not a joke, for real. I feel like well, maybe one day I'll do an episode that's like really about what boarding really is, because I realize like a lot of people don't really know what like the nitty gritty of boarding actually is, because it's like it's a lot of drawing, and you start from pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, depending if you're doing scriptive and you do have a script, but you do have to come up with a lot of ideas, and you can't just rely on the script.
Right. And you also like, you just, as a board artist, I don't think people realize like at least when you're starting out, it's, I think, maybe hard to really grasp that like you have to wear so many hats. Like
Yeah.
you can't just like be good at drawing or like know how to draw like a shot that you see,
Yes.
like you actually have to like know how to compose things, and what shot progression is, and what uh what shots evoke what emotions. You have to understand acting, you have to understand comedy and timing, and it's just like there's just so many things that you have to do
Yeah.
as a board artist that I just think it's like I think oftentimes like people even in the industry don't always understand it fully. You know what I mean?
No, I totally agree. I
Um,
feel it's like, I mean, depending on the level of it, I feel like honestly, like as a board artist, you're actually like a mini director. Like no matter what production you're on, you're always going to be a mini director just because you make so many decisions for each shot for the whole sequence that you're assigned to.
yeah.
Or at least that's what a storyboard job posting wants. They want a mini director.
Right, right, right. Right, right, right.
You
Which it's
know.
true. It's totally true. And it's also like, it's also like you kind of just like if you want something to be good, you kind of just you do need the artist to be able to do that, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately. Like I mean not I guess not unfortunately, because it's like once you learn how to do it, it's quite fun, but
Yeah, it is. I agree. I feel it's like you at the beginning, it's also kind of, I don't know, depending on what type of personality you are, like at the beginning, it's so much learning. It can be either discouraging or it can be also thrilling because it's like you're learning so much with every single shot you're doing.
right.
The learning curve is like no joke. But then once you do get over that hump, it's kind of like, oh, well, now this is much easier, but also you kind of, I don't know, there was always like uh another part of boarding that is uncharted territory, and there's always something to learn, I feel like. But after, so how long were you on Powerpuff?
I was on Powerpuff for 2 years. Yeah, 2 years, 2 seasons.
Nice.
And then the show itself ended. Like they,
Hmm.
after the third season, the show was it came to an end. And then after that, I was out of work for like I don't know a couple months, and then I got a call. I was actually hanging out with a buddy of mine, who was like, "Oh, hey, I'm working on this new movie at Sony right now, with Mike Rianda." And Mike Rianda was, uh, I had actually met him years prior in Portland for the first time, but he ended up being my story one teacher at Cal Arts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was like, he was like, my friend was like, "Do you want to come work on Mike's film? He's like looking for board artists." And I was like, "I mean, if he wants me to come work on it, I absolutely will." And then, and then also the head of story was my buddy Guillermo, who I'd actually met in Portland. And so,
Mm-hmm.
then I got a call a couple weeks later being like, "Hey, you want to come?" It wasn't even a couple weeks later, it was a couple days later, I think. And they were like, "Do you want to come work on this movie?"
That's
And I
so
was like, "Hell
cool.
yeah."
By the way, for people listening, we do have an episode with Mike Rianda. So if you're listening to this episode, you know which one you're going to listen to right after this interview. That's so cool. And so that was just a couple of days between the moment you guys were talking to when you got the call. How was the interview process like?
I didn't really do an interview.
Oh, cool. No, that's the best kind, right? Like when you're just like, you got the gig. uh,
Yeah, it's also it works, the
also because
interview.
you knew
It's because I
people.
knew them, and because Guillermo, Mike knew my boards. Guillermo knew me really well at that point. It was like they knew who I was as a person and they knew what I was capable of. So there wasn't really a need, I don't think, at that point.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
totally.
which I think just kind of happens.
Yeah.
At a certain point, like I do think it's like it's difficult to break into the industry, but once you sort of get the hang of it, and you sort of like start getting a couple of jobs and you start getting to know people and they start to know who you are as a person, they know how you are to work with, like you get referrals and stuff.
I agree. It's something that's like you definitely have to know the people here or like have worked with them. I think for me, when I like moved back from France to here, it was kind of like I kind of did have to start from scratch because people hadn't worked with me or they didn't know me. So I still had to like take a lot of tests and stuff. But
Mhm.
after a while, like you said, like after a couple of years, people start being like, oh yeah, I know this person, they're nice. Like you have to be good at working and also good individual, which is, you know, it's not that hard to be a good person, but it
Yeah.
matters a lot.
I do think that like there's kind of a misconception about like the sort of like nepotism aspect of animation sometimes. Like there is that definitely happens to a degree, but I do think that like the reality is that like animation is so collaborative.
Mhm.
You want to work with people that you want to be around and that
Yes.
that you know are collaborative. And so oftentimes like the reason that that happens isn't because people are like, oh, I just only want to hire my friends. It's because people are like, I want to know that this is somebody that's a quality human being that I can sit with for a year to 3 years, and we're gonna have a good working relationship, you know.
Yeah, it's really like something, it's funny because it's something that I've heard also like on the show that I was on previously. It's like depending on how long the show's gonna be, like the show I was on was gonna be like a 5-year type of deal. And it's like you're gonna be seeing these people for 5 years. You want to make sure you pick people that you're gonna be excited to see for 5 years.
Right. No, absolutely. And
Yeah.
you know, it is what like it, you know, it's kind of, you know, it can be a negative aspect to like breaking into the industry, but it actually can become a real asset once
Yeah.
you've kind of gotten in for a little bit, because you can start to build a rapport with people, and you start to know like this person is really good to work with, and I know like and you have like a Rolodex of people you can call on when you're like, I know, like, oh, I have this very particular project and I have people in mind for it who I know are not only skilled artistically to do the job, but they also are good people that I are good to work with, you know.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of like it gets missed in the top in the discussion about nepotism.
That's true. I feel it's just like it's and you know, it's also just like I love working with new people, but like you and I have been like directors for a while now, and it's like working with a new person is also a lot of fun. But it's also like there are a lot of uh unpredictabilities that come with like someone that you've never worked with. So you have to, for as a supervisor, it kind of puts a little bit more weight on your shoulders, because it's like, well, how does that person manage their schedule? What is their preferred mode of communication? Are they better with like calls or emails, or like in person? Are they kind of like how do they take notes? What's the best way to talk to them? And then what is the work that they will turn in? What is their favorite kind of work to do? Is it more action? Is it comedy? What are their strengths? And that takes a while to learn.
It totally does, and especially in a TV environment when you're like
Yeah.
when you're like you're up against the wire like from day one.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you don't always have, unfortunately, like I wish it wasn't like this, you know, it's unfortunately you don't always have time to like train people or like have time to like, you know, do that sort of due diligence, you know, you kind of have to like know that they can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
You
No,
know.
exactly. It's really like, because after a while, like once you learn how to work your team, you know, you can kind of like strategize around like everybody's like strengths and weaknesses. But it's like it definitely is. It means that you have this trial period where it's like, well, I know this is gonna. We'll see if I made the right decisions, because you're kind of like, it's kind of like a shot in the dark. These like first.
Totally.
But
Absolutely. My God, I haven't
yeah.
drawn Spider Noir in such a long time. This is like really
I know. I tried to like
hard.
draw him on the previous page, and I was just like, this.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, I haven't drawn for like the past year because we were like working in Blender. So I was just like, oh shoot, I'm so rusty. For
I'm
anyone
very
who's like,
rusty.
anyone who's listening on the on Spotify or iTunes or whatever, check out the YouTube video to see us draw, to see our scribbles. Yeah, so you started on Mitchell's and the Machine. That was your first feature. How long were you on Mitchell's?
I've been on it for like a year and a half. I think that's generally like how long most people are on features, like because I feel like this isn't like, or at least my experience at Sony, like for the most part, like most people stay on a feature for like about a year and a half and then like, you know, move on. There usually be like one or two people on the board team who will stay the whole time, but most people
Right.
will like roll in and off, you know, over the course of the feature production, because they like they just like reboard everything a bunch of times and like try new things and new stories and stuff.
Yeah, a year and a half is it's actually pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, I came on and like there was already like a version of the movie boarded, so.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, that's good. I feel like it's good kind of like when there's like a little bit of like the boards that have already been done, because then you're like, people are starting to get a little bit more of an idea what they're trying to do.
Yeah. That's true.
At the beginning, it feels very much like it's blue sky, do whatever you want. And then it's like,
it can be difficult. Yeah. I guess it depends on like how you prefer to work. You know what I mean? Like some people really prefer to work like with a full schedule. Some people prefer to work like, or like with a full script. I mean, and some people prefer to work more blue sky. I think it's
right.
Just like
depends on like your preference as an artist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so I was on that for about a year and a half, and then I ended up kind of like jumping around a little bit and came back and helped them out a couple times on different things, and then I boarded on a couple of things that never made it past a certain point, and then I boarded on the short Hair Love that won the Oscar a couple years. It was like I was boarding on that while I was doing Mitchell's at the same time, and then
yeah, that won the Oscar for best short, right?
It did, yeah. And then I was on Vivo for a while, for about 6 months. I storyboarded on Vivo, which is on Netflix. And then I started on Spider-Verse.
How long were you on Spidey?
Same, about a year and a half.
Oh wow, yeah.
Maybe a little bit longer, but just about that.
And for if that's okay to ask, like what did you do after Spidey, or kind of like how did you, because then you went on to directing, and kind of how was what was the thought process behind it? Were you like, well, I kind of want to move on and direct, or was it just kind of like you had been at Sony for like long enough, or kind of?
Well, a few things happened. While I was at Cartoon Network, I sold a show idea, so I was in development for about 5 years on this show, and then while I was doing that, and like while I was at working at Sony, what ended up happening is I started getting invited to a lot of brainstorm meetings for a lot of films and TV shows that they had in development, and I started sort of like developing a relationship with that part of the studio, and I would help out with development a lot. And oh my God, is that Katie and Jade?
Yeah.
I love them. Katie Mitchell. I haven't drawn Katie in a long time either. Let's see. So yeah, I worked on. I would basically like get called in to like help brainstorm on scripts or feature ideas or TV takes or whatever, and I sort of started to realize that like I actually had something to say. Like even when I sold my show, like it was really surprising to me that anyone even like wanted to buy it, because it wasn't something I didn't like go to them and pitch. Like they asked me to pitch, and I was like, they were like, do you have something that you're working on? And I was like, I do, but it's like just for myself. Like it's not like something I'm doing for like
yeah, for like
for production or whatever. But they were like, let's take a look at it or whatever, and so I pitched it, and it ended up being like they liked it or whatever. And so it was kind of like this weird it was kind of like a weird moment in my life where I think for the first time realized that like I actually had like value as an artist. If that sounds like sad to say, but it was kind of like it was just kind of the case for me.
I know what you mean though. It's like a tough thing to read. Like, I don't know. I feel like so much of like working in animation and working in this business is like, you have to be a good artist, and you have to be good at making, at executing other people's like vision that you don't often think about. Like, do I have my own personal vision?
Right. And because I had this very like kind of wind about way of getting into animation, like I think I always just felt like I wasn't very good. I think I always just felt like, even though I was getting work and like whatever, I always just kind of felt like I was lacking in some way, or that like my like that that I had really bad sort of imposter syndrome, and I really kind of felt like, okay, I'm not you know, um
Are you really an artist if you don't have imposter syndrome?
no, yeah, and
You know?
it's rough. I still have it a lot sometimes, you know what I mean? Like I'll be like,
Yeah.
damn, like I'm nobody really likes what I have to say or what I'm doing, you know, whatever. And so, you know, I think, you know, what ended up happening is I started getting invited to these brainstorm meetings, and what I kind of realized is that, you know, growing up, like I was moving around all the time as a kid, you know, like I was always, you know, having to make new friends like
Mm-hmm.
every 2 years basically, because I, you know, didn't have a consistent home base. I was always moving. And so I basically like kind of had to learn how to assimilate
Yeah.
like everywhere I went. And it
Mm-hmm.
kind of like what ended up happening is I developed like kind of an obsession with like um I kind of developed like an obsession with like understanding who people are and like what makes them tick, and like what, you know, what makes people behave the way that they do, what makes people like feel a certain way, you know, like I got really really good at reading people, you know, and it was like a survival
Nice.
thing, you know what I mean? Like it was like
Yeah.
I needed that so that I could like assimilate with all these like different groups of people all the time when I was moving. um
Yeah.
and like when I started going into these brainstorms at Sony, what I realized was like I actually like really understand character.
Mm.
And like, and it, because of that, because I like spent like so much of my life like, you know, trying to understand people and trying to understand what makes people the way that they are. And so I would be in a story room and I'd be like, oh, this character does, somebody would be like, oh well, what if the character does this? And I would be like, well, you know, if I was that character, like
Mm.
I would probably do this because of this experience, and because that would have made me feel this way, and like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And what I discovered is that people were like, oh my god, that like makes so much sense. And I was like, and to me it just seemed really like, of course that's what it is, like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I think it's just because I spent so much of my life
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
analyzing that kind of stuff, you know, so to me it just felt really natural and obvious. And so like that kind of started to translate into like, oh, like I can apply this to story in a way that I didn't really expect to be able to. And it just like, I started to realize like, oh, I actually like have something to say about like the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so like that is sort of like where I kind of found my voice, I think, where I was just kind of like, okay, like I think I know, I think I have something to contribute to this industry and to the storytelling as a whole. And that was like the moment for me, I think, where I started to feel like confidence for the first time. um and then you know, I ended up getting an agent, or a manager, I mean. And you know, she was sort of the one who kind of like was like the catalyst for like, you know, you can do these other jobs, you know, like like you're capable, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, 100%. I feel like this is something that like we don't talk about enough in animation, or at least on social media and animation. So like having an agent is so important to someone who wants to have a career moving up. Like if I feel like if someone is like content being a board artist or being like a designer, I think that's great. And in that case, like having an agent might not be as like necessary, but I definitely feel like if you're a person who wants to eventually move up to like directing, supervising, directing, producing, all of that, like having an agent is like very crucial.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I don't think I would have gotten like a fraction of the opportunities I've gotten without her.
And same for me. It's like I remember like I was like I've been boarding for 10 years. I kind of want to try directing, but it was really hard to get opportunities directing because there's not that many roles.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, having an agent really puts you on the map in a different way.
It totally
um
does. It really does.
yeah, that's so cool. And that's kind of how you were kind of like working with her on the side, kind of like preparing these opportunities as you were also kind of like looking for directing opportunities. And or maybe also because Sony didn't have those opportunities, would you say, in terms of like?
Yeah, I really love Sony a lot, and like I hope to work with them again. It was just like, and they were honestly like they were incredibly supportive of like me moving up in the industry. Like truly, like the confidence that Sony allowed me to build was like priceless.
Mm.
Um, when I but they definitely like, you know, it was mid-pandemic, like there's not really like a lot going on, you know, like feature was, you know, struggling during the pandemic because because the theatrical releases were stopped and stuff. So
Mhm.
um it was kind of like what ended up happening is they offered me an opportunity, them and Mike Rienda offered me this opportunity to direct a short for the Mitchell's DVD release. And it's about Katie and Jade. It's like a short, it's a live action film actually. It's a live action puppet short about like Katie and Jade's relationship, but like it's a dog cop short. um and so then that was really amazing, and I'm like super grateful that they let me do that. But so I did that, and it was like my sort of like dipping my toe into directing. And then it was just kind of like they were like, we don't really have anything left here for you right now, like we don't have like opportunities for you to like move up or anything like that. And like, you know, but at the time I was also interviewing like for a few different directing jobs at the same time as this was going on. And I had already by the time that they had sort of like let me know like, hey, we don't know if we have anything like upcoming right now. I had already accepted a job to go direct because of that reason, because I just knew there wasn't that much going on at the studio.
Right.
And it was just kind of like, it just not, at least for me, like at least like something that would work for my sensibilities or for what I was wanting to do. And so uh I said my goodbyes, hopefully temporarily, to Sony, and I went off to start directing an adult show. um and now I'm directing on a different show.
That's awesome. But do you feel like would you say we'll get to the questions after that shortly, but like what would you say are kind of like the hardest things about directing and the things that are the most fun?
Hardest things about directing.
And how does it differ also from storyboarding, you know, being on the other side?
Yeah, storyboarding is hard.
Yeah.
Storyboarding is like super hard. I think directing is different in that like you have your hands on like a lot of different things. You have your hand on like the overall story rather than like being focused on just one sequence.
Mhm.
um and you so But I think that the thing that people don't realize when they, you know, want to move up in animation is that like you really do need to have like people skills. You kind of like, because you have to manage people, you know, you have to
Mhm.
like, you have to help them, you have to give them notes, you have to, like you were saying before, like understand people's, I feel like, you know, we've talked about this I think before,
Yeah.
like you have to have some ability to tap into like who the people on your team are, what they need, um you know, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, you know, whatever, what have you. um and that's not easy, and it's like a different job entirely than storyboarding.
Yeah,
You
it
know.
really is. I feel like I think yeah, the people aspect is like so big because yeah, like you know, like I don't know if you, I think you had probably like a different experience because you're I think you're very good with people. For me, I kind of tended to think like, well, everyone kind of works like I work, and then you're like, oh wait, no, hold on. we And I think that takes like a little bit of time to adjust. I think is like most artists kind of like fall in that pitfall of like, oh, it's true, like, you know,
Yeah.
uh we don't work all the same. Some people like they don't have anything to show until the very last minute. It's just how they work. Some people they need deadlines, other people prefer no deadlines, other
Yeah, it's true, it's true. People, yeah, everyone's very different. Some people like, yeah, it's so true. And it's also like some people need more notes and some people need less, and some people like, you know, need more direction, some people need less direction, you know. It's just really like,
Yeah.
it also like a lot of times comes down to the sensibilities of the show. Like some people, like sometimes you'll have a board artist who just like really gets the style of the show in a way that like you can kind of be more hands off. And then sometimes it's like that you might have an awesome board artist who it's not this their sensibility, and so you have to like help them find it, you know. And there's just like it just you have to sort of kind of budget that into your into your
That's
like understanding of the process, you know.
That's so true. And I think, yeah, you're touching on to something that I wish people were talking about more, that I rarely hear anyone talking about. But so when going on the show, there is clearly a style, like a design kind of style. So yeah, you're gonna like learn how to draw the characters, and then you can draw them, and then you're gonna learn kind of like what the EPs kind of like better. But then there's like this whole like filmmaking that's dependent on the show, and it's kind of invisible because it's kind of like, which kind of shots do you favor over others, or what kind of pacing do you favor? And that's like such a big part. And sometimes I feel like there are shows where people are just like, well, that's just a sensibility and people just kind of have to get it. And it's like, no, you can teach the style of a show. But definitely there's like this moment when you have to like learn that style, like learn that filmmaking style or tone.
I definitely think, you know what, I on that kind of note, I think you're right. I also think that unfortunately, something that I wish was a little different in our industry is that I think that a lot of times, potentially because a lot of people that are going into leadership positions like are coming from an artistic side, and they aren't necessarily like given managerial training, like
Mhm.
like I think a lot of times people go like, well, they don't get it like immediately after like one day or like
Yeah.
1 month or whatever, and you're like, well, they're not a right fit. And it's like, you know, that like one, like you should communicate with people, number one,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
when they're not getting things right, or like, you know, try to work through it with them. But also like, you know, if somebody's not getting something, like sometimes that just means you need better communication.
Yeah, that's
You
so
know what I
true.
mean? Like,
Yeah, that's so true. I feel like it's something that is kind of like that's kind of interesting, right? Like, because sometimes there, that is true. You'll have artists that will just instinctively uh get the style of a show, and others that will need the style to be explained to them. But and then yeah, it's nice when somebody can like lay it out. Like this kind of shot.
yeah,
This
or
is
like,
when you cut. This is how you make the joke shine. Or like, this line reads like a joke. It's not a joke. Play it seriously. Like all that kind of stuff. That
right, I'm
is
like, you know, you can't just expect people to read your mind and know exactly what you want, you know, like you kind of have to
right.
like, you have to explain it to them, and like what, and sometimes you need to give them the why, you know. Like
Yes. Yes.
I just think that like I think people sometimes miss that because they're like, they're so focused on like, you know, just getting the job done or whatever. And I'm like, you know, that's cool and all, but like also, you know, if you're the director of something, or you're the showrunner, or you're directing a feature or whatever, like it's your job to like make sure that the people on your team understand your vision,
Yeah.
you know. And like if people aren't understanding it, and like you're seeing it and they're not seeing it, like maybe it's time to like just take a second to explain it a little bit, or like really dive deep and like communicate, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that like I've had bosses who are really good at that, and I've had bosses that are not very good at that, you know. So
Yeah, I think it's yeah, same for me. I would say it would be probably something like a 50-50. So you, when getting on on a new show, I think it's always good to be on the lookout. Not you, even as a board artist, to just kind of try to really look for indicators of what could be the style of the show, if it's not being like laid out super clearly.
Yeah.
Um,
And then I think that the flip side of that is that like if you're a board artist or you're somebody on a show, like you should be asking questions.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, like definitely, like it's not all on the directors, it's also on the people who are on the team to like make sure that you're trying to understand and that you're trying to bridge any gaps that might be happening.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what would be what you think is the fun part of like directing?
I mean, there's a lot of aspects of it that I like. I mean, I think because I find that I'm better as like a macro person. Like I like touching
Yeah.
like the overall story arcs of stuff and like, you know, connecting the dots between things. Like I think I like that aspect of it, like having more control over like the overall story.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably like the funnest thing for me. When it comes to like the job itself. I also just really like helping people and like helping people find what works for them. In my last job, I had a lot of board artists who were, it was like their first time boarding. And it was like surprisingly gratifying for me to like see how much they grew as board artists. And like hearing them tell me that they were learning and stuff was like incredibly, like I actually really loved that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's really sweet. It's like, okay. It's kind of, yeah, it's gratifying in two senses. It's like I help someone, but also it's kind of like I actually know stuff. Like I'm not talking out of my ass, you know?
Yeah, it is kind of validating. It is kind of
Yeah.
validating when you feel like you can help someone and you're like, oh, wait, maybe I have learned something over these many years of schooling and working.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So fun.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go into a couple questions from our patrons and Twitter.
Mhm.
Let's see. From our patron Bayan Lynn Spare, what differences did you see from working on TV and then on films as a board artist? Both positives and negatives between the two.
Is this just like a general overall question?
Yeah, kind of like what would you say are like the main differences? And then just if you can kind of like say like, oh, I think this is the cool part about working in TV. And then I think this is the cool part about working in feature. And then like this is the part that would probably be like could need a little oiling in TV or in feature.
I would say they're just very different beasts, TV and feature, is what I will say. I guess I'll kind of come at this from like a boarding perspective, but I think that like feature, one of the major differences like in terms of like the day-to-day experience is that like feature is a lot more relaxed schedule wise and TV is like much tighter. So like when you're in feature you have a lot more time to like sit and think and process and explore, and you know, because the film is going to take about 3 to 5 years to make, generally speaking, depending on where you're at, sometimes shorter, sometimes not. And if you are, if you're somebody who likes to take their time, like feature is great for that. In terms of, and in TV it's like you're like hitting the ground running like so fast, like all the time. In terms of like style of boarding, it's very different as well. Like if you're working in feature, you're going to be, the challenge is like the cinematography and like the storytelling of, and the making sure that your shot choices are very like story driven and all of that. Whereas like in television, it depends on the show really, but in television the focus I think is more on comedy generally.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, and clarity probably.
Yeah. And so they're different, they're just different sensibilities a lot of the time, and then like different schedules. The other thing I would say though is that like in TV you get a lot more ownership over your work, because like a lot of the time like what you're boarding is going to like make it to screen like pretty verbatim, but like when it comes to feature, you're reboarding the same 90 minutes for like 3 to 5 years, and so you know, your stuff's going to get boarded and reboarded by other people. You're going to reboard other people's stuff. You're going to like, you know, you're lucky if like something that you boarded makes it into the film. Like verbatim, you know, because it's you maybe your ideas will make it in, but your like your actual boards making it in is more rare, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So I think like, you know, if you want to have that ownership, like, you know, TV is a better place to be potentially for that. So they're just very different. Like I'd say like I think I am more of a feature person at heart because I'm my sort of style of like the things I like to do like storytelling wise tend to lend themselves to feature more because I like, you know, big sweeping stories and lore and, you know, really complex emotional stuff.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of harder to kind of cram that into a TV show unless you're on the last couple seasons of BoJack, I guess.
Yeah, well, and you know, and I think that that's changing because there is like sort of this hybrid thing happening in animation right now, where like, you know, the style of storytelling is kind of like overlapping a little bit more. But I would say like, yeah, generally speaking, like if you want to tell like a dramatic story and like you want to like spend time like crafting you know, crafting of like a film, like, you know, filmmaking language or whatever, like I think traditionally feature is where you want to go for that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know, they're just different. Like you know, also like if you're somebody who gets tired of a project like after a short amount of time, like feature probably isn't the place for you either, you know, like because you are just reboarding the same 90 minutes over and over again for like years. You know, it can get like exhausting, you know, which is I also think why it's helpful when features kind of like cycle between artists here and there, because like you get tired of seeing the same thing over and over again. It's hard to like come up with new ideas after a certain point, you know.
Yeah, that's really true. I feel that. I feel like when you're on your like 27th take of the same sequence, you're like, what are we doing here? Yeah, it can kind of burn you out as an artist just working on the same thing. Yeah, that answered the questions from at Cached Art, because we had one from the patron on the Discord and we had that one on Twitter as well. So I thought that was like a really great answer that covers all the points.
Oh, cool.
We have another question from at Flippy Super. How do you handle working on projects with such different art styles? This is kind of a fun question.
I guess that's kind of something that I think is like a skill that is good for people to develop just in general in their lives, I think, because if you're going to be in animation, just because you kind of are just going to have to work in different styles sometimes.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I mean, like how I handle it, I kind of just try to keep my like, here's what I'll say. I struggled a lot for many years with like staying loose. I still kind of have that problem. But like, I think I sort of really tried really hard to stay away from like, oh, this is my style. Because you know, and I think everyone just naturally develops one over time, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to, if you don't think about it, you're still gonna have one. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's not gonna matter. Like
it's just the way you draw. I feel like, yeah, that's so funny. I forgot if we've talked about this on the show before, but I do feel like style is just something that like the more you draw, the more you're gonna have a style, because nobody does the lines like you do for a million reasons.
Right, exactly. Like you just because all drawing is like finding a solution to a problem, which is like, how do I communicate this idea, right? So like everyone's gonna find that solution a different way, and like some people's solutions are gonna look similar, which is why like some people look like they have a similar style, you know. But like I actually think that like I think it's kind of a detriment to, in my opinion, to go into like the world of animation and be like, this is my style, like I'm gonna do this. Like I actually found like a lot of friends of mine who went to school at like the academy and stuff, like oftentimes I felt like you know, they would go like, oh well, this is my style, like, and that's what I want to do, it's just my style. And I'm like, well, if that's what you want to do, like illustration is fine, but you can't work for a production then, you know.
That's
like
true.
like
Unless you draw like SpongeBob and then you get SpongeBob gigs until the end of
I
his
guess so,
life.
yeah. If that's like, yeah, if like if you're like, all I want to do is work on this, like, and
Yeah.
that's it, that's all I want to do, and like that's, you're like super committed to that, then like that's fine, you know. But like I also think it depends, if you're a biz dev artist, that there's a little bit of leeway there too. Like if you're very, very good at your job as like a character designer or like a biz dev artist, like that's a little bit different. But when it comes to like, that's a big difference between TV and feature as well, is that like if you're a character designer or a background designer in television, you have to style match. But like if you're
Mhm.
if you're a biz dev artist, oftentimes you're brought on because of your unique voice.
That's
So
very true. And that's very feature as well. But story doesn't really have that part of it. Except I guess story, like people will look past the drawing style, but they will try to see what's behind the drawing style and see kind of like what the tone that you usually gravitate towards. Kind of like they're gonna see like, oh, this person draws funny cartoons, or this one draws like drama, serious kind of.
right.
So yeah, for story, it's very different the way they look at the art, because it's not so much the actual lines, it's more the feeling that's behind it. Whereas yeah, like you were saying, viz dev, it's like, oh, the shape language, the kind of color palette, the light. Yeah.
Right. And so like, yeah, like, so yeah, I but I actually think that like the sort of less you focus on like, quote unquote, what is my style, the more likely it is you're going to find one that's actually good for you, because like you're just going to like naturally develop that. So I think like I kind of tried to stay away from that, and I kind of like, I just kind of tried to stay open, I guess, to like what the new style of whatever I'm working on like has to offer, and I just kind of like apply my thinking to the style, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a great answer.
I think like thinking about drawing as problem solving is probably the way to go, you know.
Yeah, totally. And that's really what it is, especially for like, depending on the show. If you're like on a show that's like realistic, well, the problem solving is going to be more like relying on anatomy and perspective. But if you're working on a cartoony show, you're thinking more like silhouette or like shape language rather like than logic. So it's really just kind of like the type of solution that you come up with is dependent on the style of the tone of the show.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at the end of the day, like it's not like style doesn't matter at all, like it does, because obviously like you're going to get cast in things like on projects based on like your, but style encompasses more than just your drawing, right? It encompasses like your filmmaking style, your comedy style, your like your sensibilities around like, you know, drama, your sensibilities around like, you know, even if you're a viz dev artist, it's something like, you know, what kind of like painting techniques do you use, you know, like there's just like that stuff does come into play. I just think that like you if you're somebody who's wanting to work in a way where you get to work on stuff that's many different styles, you kind of have to like keep that openness to your work, I think. And
Yeah,
like sort of stay open to the ability or to the possibilities of like trying new styles.
totally. I love that. I think that's a great answer. Um, oh, I forgot to ask you. This is a question we ask all of our guests. How do you deal with creative block? And when you face it, what does it look like for you?
Well, that's a good question, and also kind of a difficult one, to be honest. I don't know that I'm really great at dealing with creative block, to be honest. I think the greatest help, the aid for me in creative block is like a fucking, sorry, excuse my language, a deadline. A deadline helps my creative block immensely.
I agree.
I have ADHD, and so like it's kind of a struggle, to be honest. Like if I don't have like a creative drive, or like I feel like I'm losing out on ideas, it's kind of difficult. What I will say is actually this is something an artist told me this one time, and I always thought that this was really, really smart. He told me that he started to hate drawing after working in the industry for a few years. He said because he was like working so hard and he just felt burnt out, and like he just hated, he lost his love for the job and for the work. And he told me that the thing that he did to get the love back was that he started to literally just like, without any agenda, without any thought, without any like intention, he would literally just draw lines on paper, like nonsensical lines. And like the purpose being, he wanted to only enjoy the line he was making, and that was like the only thing he was focused on for like a while. He said he like really just kind of like sat there and like drew stuff that only lines that made him happy. And he said that like that change like brought his like slowly brought his love back to for the work, because it was just purely for joy. And that's something that I try to think about. Like oftentimes I'll like sit um I'll like sit in my apartment and I'll be like, okay, I want to like get my, creative juices flowing, so I'm gonna like, you know I'm gonna try and like sit here and draw this thing. Like recently I've been, for myself, I wrote this like very sad, intense poem, and I've been like trying to draw it as like a comic, and just like for myself, like it's not really like for anything at all. And what I'll do is like I'll sit down, and some days I'm like, I don't know if I like know what to draw here. And I try to like keep that guy in my mind, and I'll be like, okay, um I'm gonna sit here for a while, and I'm gonna just draw like either the character or a background or something like that makes me happy, and not care if it's good or not care if it's like gonna make it into the final piece. And that actually like has been really, really helpful, because I'm just drawing to like enjoy the process, if that makes sense. Like, and I know that like it's okay if it doesn't become anything.
I think
uh
that's great, especially for like that's a great thought for people who've been like working a bunch in the industry, because I feel like there's like kind of different type of creative blocks, right? There's the one where it's like you're kind of like doubting yourself, like, am I ever going to be good, and am I ever going to make something good? But then there's like the other creative block that's kind of like the burnout block, where it's like you're saying, it's like, I don't want to do this, I'm tired, this is what I'm doing all the time, how and like
yeah,
rekindling this love it is really tough, because especially for artists, like I relate to that a lot, because I went into animation because I love drawing. Drawing is like something that's very important for me, and when I don't feel like drawing, it's kind of like, oh, what is my life all about now that
yeah,
I don't love doing this anymore? And a lot of artists go through that, so I think that's like a really great answer and angle on it, just like the taking up the pressure and just finding the joy.
yeah. I and honestly, like, why are we doing this anyway? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I do think it's easy to lose that. Like, it's super easy to lose it, because when you do make it your job, like, you're doing it. It's like you suddenly you're not just doing this because you love it. You're doing it because you have to like make ends meet, and because you have a career that you feel like needs to go somewhere, or you have like, some kind of like expectation of yourself, or you feel like other people do. And so I think sometimes getting back to like the root of like why you enjoyed something in the first place is like the way that you get out of the rut, you know?
It really is. It's kind of funny. We had like an EP on a show I was on that was like, he'd come visit the bars and he'd be like, so are you guys having fun? I hope you're having a ton of fun. I can't wait to see what you're drawing. It's this kind of funny situation, because you're like, oh, I'm paid to have fun, but then when it becomes a job, the fun isn't fun anymore. It's just kind of
Yeah.
that's so funny. That's kind of like absurd in a
I
funny way.
that's also something that I think like could is part of something that I try to like I don't know if I succeed, but I do try to like keep that in my mind as I'm working on my jobs with my crews, like on my board teams, because and I try to remind them of it too. Like at the end of the day, I'm like, this is just a job, you know, like people will get like really down on themselves or feel bad because they like need to take a break or because they need to like, you know, do something for themselves or whatever. And I'm like, and they get really like upset and like apologetic or whatever because they need to take care of themselves or because they feel like they're not like, you know, hitting some sort of like goalpost or whatever. And I try to just be like, you know, like you're a person, you know, and like this, like, while like we want to do a good job here and we want to like make a quality product, we also like, this is your day job. This isn't your passion project. You know what I mean? And like you shouldn't have to feel like you have to make it your whole world just because it's your job and because you're an artist, you know?
Yeah, it becomes really hard because there is a lot of competition in this industry. So it's always that kind of like balance of like how much, when am I really proving myself? When can I take a breather? When is it okay to perform just at a normal if I get the feeling that everybody else is like overperforming and stuff. So it is tricky, but at the end of the day, I feel like when you've been in this crazy business for a couple of years, you're probably fine.
Yeah, and I just think like I actually think that like you make better work when you have boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, like that's my personal belief. Like I think that there's like I think there for many years there was like this idea in the industry that like you just got to put your head down and you just got to like pay your dues, like don't complain, like just do this, like just like, you know, just like work your butt off and like don't like just be grateful that you have a job. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, you should be grateful that you have work and you should like be respectful of the opportunity you've been given. Absolutely. You also like this is your job, not your not your entire being like in your entire life, right? So like I actually think that like that I think that that mentality is changing, and I hope it continues to change because I actually think that crews that take um crews that sort of take care of uh their people and sort of like um you know allow people to have lives outside and respect their boundaries and like give them breaks and like consider the health of their crews. Like I think those crews are able to make better work. Like you if you actually
Yeah.
want people to be ultra productive, like give them time to rest. You know, like
Mhm.
give them time to like and does that require a budget? Sure, but it also like if you really are committed to making like a quality piece of work, like you know, you've got to allow your people to you know, have a sense of self in a life.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree because if you don't have that life, then it's like you start becoming like um like your, what's the word, like your point of view on the world kind of shrinks to somebody said that on the podcast, I forgot who it was, where it was like if you if your icon or the drawings that you do is just you in front of a Cintiq, then like how do I know you can contribute something else to your project?
That's
Kind
a
of.
yeah, that's a fair point. You know, I you know, this is actually that you know this I think maybe this I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but I think that but like you know I do think that part of the reason a lot of people have been saying to me recently like, oh, you're like your career moved kind of fast, right? Like they're like, oh, you've kind of gone from like board artist to director like really quickly. And I was like, did I though? you know, like
Yeah.
I started my career late, yes, and as a result of that, like, you know, it does, like, the number of years I've been in this industry and how, like, far I've gotten, yes, it's a short amount of time, but it's not that, like, I just jumped into animation and became, and like just immediately got promoted. It's that, like, I had a lot of life experience before I got here. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like, I and I think that if you want to be a really, really good storyteller, if you want to be someone who can create original ideas and say something that, like, you know, hasn't been said, or say something in a new way, or you know, tell a story that feels new and fresh, like, those ideas come from life experience, like those ideas come from having time with yourself in the world and observing people and observing experiences. It doesn't come from sitting at the computer,
Yeah,
you know.
I
And like,
agree. Mm-hmm.
I just think that, like, a lot of times young people get really, really like, oh my god, I just have to work, I just have to work, I just have to work. I'm like, yeah, but you also need to live. like like, you know, like, it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do, and it took me, and I still don't, like, always know even now, you know. And like, I'm just kind of like riding the wave of life and like working really hard at what I do, but like doing it with the knowledge that, like, you know, stuff is always changing, you know, and like it's okay. And like, I think that, if I think people oftentimes get so focused on like the one thing that they want to do, or where they have the perception of where they need to be, and I think that can actually be really detrimental to your experience, because if you're actually just like if you're working to live instead of living to work, you know, like, you're gonna end up having the experiences that give you the
Yeah.
fuel for that, all that content, give you for new ideas, but also to all the fuel to be better at your job, like, especially if you're a board artist, you know, like, you want to be able to like do really good comedy timing, you want to be able to do like, um you know, to choose really interesting storytelling shots, like, you know what gives you that, like, going out into the world and seeing cool, interesting new spaces, and meeting new interesting people who make you think in a new way, or, you know, uh going you know, visiting somewhere in nature and seeing something beautiful that you've never seen before and using that as inspiration for something, like, you know, those things are what like, those kinds of references are what create like the best stuff, you know. And you can't get that from just like a Google search of the thing is not going to give you the same experience, you know.
Yeah. That's very true.
I don't know. I just, you know, and again, like, I know everyone has a different life experience, and like, it's, you know, obviously, like, there's something to be said for people who are, you know, putting their nose to the grindstone and really working hard, but there's another aspect of that, you know, and that's just like, go out and like, you know, find the thing that makes you feel like alive, and like use that in your work, you know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely finding. Yeah, I think that's like, you know, like we were saying, also just read before, the thing of like, yeah, finding the thing that keeps you engaged and entertained in what you're making. Do you have any goals for the future? Things that anything you want to plug? Anything that you're excited about? Um, Next steps of your career?
I mean, honestly, like, my big goal in my life right now is to get to know myself even better.
Mm-hmm.
um like, you know, care for the people around me in the best way that I can, and to like, you know, if I'm talking about like my career specifically, I think my biggest goal is to create spaces where people feel like their voices are heard, and
Mm-hmm.
like, and that where they feel like respected and valued, and given, like, you know, and allowed to have boundaries, and allowed to be treated like a human being. That's, I think that's my like big goal, is to sort of like like I want to tell meaningful stories, but I want them to come from a place and people who feel loved and feel valued and feel appreciated. I think that when I think about animation and I think about like films and shows and like and all this great content, what I also think about is like how many shows get made where like the crews are just so unhappy, or like situations where people just feel like it burns them out, or it does the thing to them where it makes them feel like they don't want to do it anymore. And that makes me really sad. And so I think like the thing I would really like in my career is to be able to create like a feeling that is the opposite of that, which is that like no, like we I think all the really the films, the measure of success for a film for me at this point, or like a show, is yes, to a degree, the quality of the work itself, but I think but more than that, I think it's the quality of the experience that the people had making it, right? Because like because that is like a film and a show, those are a sum of more than it's a sum of a bunch of parts, right? And so like and then those parts are the people that made it, and so like I would like to see a world where the measure of success of a show or a feature is that is taken into account more, and so I think that's like my goal, is to create a situation where people can say like, yeah, I like what we made, but I loved making it.
Just like I read somewhere, I forgot where, but that Vince Gilligan was able to make his hit series Breaking Bad while still being courteous to the writing team. You don't have to be an asshole to make something great.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like you don't, like your team can be happy and healthy, and you can, and I also think that people oftentimes want to work harder for when they feel like valued and respected and like they matter.
I agree. I agree with that. I feel like I made my best work on shows that I felt the work was appreciated and mattered. Because then you wanna push harder and make pitch and see that people are happy about your pitch.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And like I don't know if you've ever, like, I'm sure you have. I know, like, because like we've had conversations about this kind of thing before, but I think like, gosh, like what a beautiful like experience when you are in a room with people and you're all so excited about like an episode, or you're excited about like this incredible like piece of writing, or like a beautiful piece of biz dev, and you're all like pumped on the possibility, and like cheering each other on and being like, wow, like you did this incredible job, and it makes me want to do a better job, like like that experience is like untouchable. And like if you can create that feeling and like have it last through a production, like what a gift.
For real.
So
yeah, I love that. I think this is a great place to end this episode on a positive note that this kind of environment exists, and we are going to keep making more of them.
Yes.
Well, that's the end of this creative block. Thanks, Caitlin, for being our guest and sharing your story. And thanks to our listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast, and Malik for helping us produce the show. If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as a bonus episode. Click the link in the description of this episode. I've been your host, V. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week. Bye.